The Santa who wasn't. It was Christmas Eve, a night that should have been filled with warmth, joy, and holiday spirit. But for 7-year-old Noah and his younger sister Ava, everything felt eerily quiet in their home. Their mother, who had been drinking since the afternoon, was passed out cold in her room, completely unaware of the unsettling events that were about to unfold. Noah stared out the window, watching as the snow began to fall. He tried to shake off the unease that gripped him. A sense of danger lingered in the cold night air. Ava clung to her stuffed bunny, occasionally looking up at Noah with wide eyes. There was something off about tonight, something Noah couldn't quite place. Suddenly, a knock at the front door echoed through the house. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent, like someone desperate to get inside. "Who's that?" Ava whispered, voice shaking. Noah hesitated. "It's probably a mistake. Maybe someone just needs help." But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Nobody ever came to their house. His mind raced. "Stay here. Don't move, Ava," he ordered. Noah tiptoed down the hallway, the creaky floorboards squeaking beneath his feet. His breath hung in the air as he peered through the peephole. Through the glass, he saw him. A man, dressed as Santa Claus, standing on the doorstep. His red suit was worn and tattered, like it had seen years of wear. The white trim of his beard was filthy, yellowed, as if it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. His eyes. Noah's breath caught in his chest. There was something about them, something deep and hollow in his gaze, as if he wasn't even seeing them, only staring right through. The man knocked again, louder this time. "I know the cops aren't coming, kids. Open up, or you're going to be in big trouble," he called out with a voice far too gruff for someone who should have been spreading holiday cheer. A chill ran down Noah's spine. This wasn't Santa. This wasn't even a man. Something dark had come to their door. In a panic, Noah slammed the deadbolt lock on the door, then raced up to find Ava. "We need to hide," he whispered urgently. "Now, don't make a sound." Ava was already crying, terrified. But Noah couldn't explain why he was so scared. All he knew was that he had to protect his little sister. He had to do something before it was too late. Then it happened. The knocks grew louder, more aggressive. The man was no longer knocking gently, as if asking for an invitation. It was as if he had all the time in the world, just waiting for them to let him in. Thinking quickly, Noah raced down to the kitchen. He had an idea, something he remembered from a story his father had told him about how smoke alarms could call for help. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed all the candles they had in the house, the ones they used for their menorah. His small hands shook as he struck a match, the flames flickering dangerously close to his fingers. He lit every single candle he could find, then rushed over to the smoke detector in the hallway. Noah didn't even think. His 7-year-old mind didn't allow for reasoning. He quickly blew out each candle, one by one, and tossed them up towards the smoke detector. He blew out the last candle and watched in awe as the thick black smoke filled the air. The smoke alarm screeched to life. The sound felt like a lifeline, a scream for help. There was no turning back now. Within seconds, sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming, but was it fast enough? Upstairs, Ava screamed. "Noah, what did you do?" The man at the door didn't back off, though. In fact, he seemed to grow more animated. Noah could hear his muffled voice through the door. The sound of heavy footsteps pounding the porch brought him to the window. He squinted through the curtains. The flashing lights of the fire trucks were getting closer, but to Noah's horror, the man, Santa, wasn't moving. Noah could barely breathe as the fire truck pulled up to the house, its sirens blaring. Through the haze of smoke and panic, Noah watched in disbelief as the man opened the door himself, right in front of the firefighters. My kids are inside," the man said with a shaky smile, pretending to be someone familiar, someone trusted. "I'm Santa Claus. I came to surprise them." The firefighter stared at him for a second, then glanced down at the open door. "Is everyone inside okay?" he asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. The man nodded again, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Well, there's a bit of an emergency. I was out here with my presents, but I lost my keys. They've locked the door. Please, it's for the kids. I just need you to open the door and save them from the fire. But then something caught the firefighter's attention. Noah's frantic, tear-soaked face staring through the window. Noah was sobbing now, mouthing through the glass. That's when it happened. What did you just say? The firefighter demanded, his voice now cold with authority. Who exactly are you, and why are you here? It's just for them. The man stammered, but the words lost weight under the glare of the firefighter's determined stare. As the firefighter turned toward Noah and shouted for confirmation, everything became clear. A voice, shaky with fear and trembling, echoed from Noah's lips. He's not our dad. He's not Santa Claus. He's a stranger. Suddenly, everything changed. The firefighters were quick. One grabbed the man by his shirt collar, slamming him into the side of the truck. As another pulled out handcuffs, they called for backup. Noah and Ava could hardly comprehend the flood of emotions, relief, dread, confusion, as the scene unfolded before them. The police arrived soon after and arrested the man, revealing he wasn't a Santa Claus at all. No one in their neighborhood even knew who he was. His story had been nothing more than an elaborate ruse. As the man was driven away in handcuffs, Noah felt a cold sensation in his chest. Later that evening, when their father arrived home, he was both furious at their mother and incredibly grateful that his kids were okay. But as Noah lay in bed, trying to forget the horror they had experienced, one thing stayed with him forever. What would have happened if they had opened the door? To this day, Noah believes that being Jewish and not celebrating Christmas saved them. Had they believed the man at the door, they may never have made it past that night. And so, their usual quiet, uneventful Christmas had become one they would never forget. The door they never opened had been the only thing that kept them alive. Whispers in the snow. The night air was thick with a bitter chill, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to let go. Every breath felt like a sharp sting in your lungs as the blizzard outside howled its fury against the cabin. Deep in the mountains, miles away from civilization, Emily and her younger brother James found themselves snowed in at their family's old winter cabin, tucked away for a quiet Christmas escape. What was supposed to be a peaceful getaway quickly turned into a nightmare they could never have imagined. Their parents, who had arrived earlier that day, were sitting by the fireplace, relaxed and oblivious to the building tension in Emily's mind. But she felt it, the shift in the air. The cabin, rustic and secluded, had always felt cozy in years past. But tonight, something was different, something wrong. Emily had gone outside earlier to collect firewood with James, and when she returned, the atmosphere felt off. The winds had calmed just enough to let them hear something, a faint whisper, almost inaudible, coming from deep in the woods. She had thought she was hearing things, a trick of the wind, or perhaps her imagination, but now she couldn't shake the sensation that they were not alone. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered to James, her voice tight with unease. James, only 11, was staring at the door with wide eyes. He nodded slowly, barely breathing. "Yeah, I thought it was the wind at first, but it's too clear. Maybe someone's lost." "We should tell Mum and Dad," Emily suggested, but there was hesitation in her voice. The cold seemed to hang in the air like a heavy blanket, suppressing every sound except the howling of the wind. The whispers grew louder and more distinct. "Stay. Stay inside," they seemed to say, faint but unmistakable, as if a dozen voices had converged to form a single chilling command. At first, Emily brushed it off as the wind's strange dance around the cabin, but the more she listened, the more she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The voices weren't random. They sounded like they were calling her. "Do you hear that?" Emily asked again, but this time, her voice cracked with fear. Before James could answer, the whispers cut through the air with terrifying clarity. They weren't just noises anymore. They were instructions, commands. "Come closer." Emily. Her heart skipped. Her feet were frozen, unmoving, as if she was drawn to the sound, something whispering directly to her mind. I don't want to go outside. It's too cold. Too dark. James's voice wavered with fear. Emily glanced back towards her parents, who were oblivious, still laughing by the fireplace, lost in their own world. The house was silent, aside from the growing voices. Panic began to rise inside her chest. She didn't want to leave the safety of the cabin, but she had to know what the voices wanted. They sounded so real, so urgent. Maybe we should check it out, Emily said, though she didn't believe the words as they left her mouth. But the urge to investigate, to satisfy the fear gnawing at her, was overpowering. And so, they both reluctantly headed toward the back door, the door that led straight into the wild, frozen woods. Once outside, the snow crunched beneath their feet, the bitter cold numbing their skin instantly. It was silent, except for the voices, sifting in and out of the wind, as if they were trying to push through from the very air itself. Emily, come closer. The cabin isn't safe, Her breath caught in her throat as she took a step forward. Did you hear that? It said the cabin isn't safe, she said to James, her voice trembling now. Before James could respond, a distant figure appeared in the snow, standing perfectly still, just beyond the trees. At first it was merely a shadow, but as they watched, it started to move towards them. Emily's blood ran cold. The figure was wearing what looked like a tattered old coat, someone or something, covered head to toe, with only the faint outline of a face visible under a dark hood. The figure wasn't walking, though. It was gliding across the snow, its feet never touching the ground. James, stay close, Emily whispered. We need to go back inside now. But her feet wouldn't move. Her body was paralyzed in terror. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. Now they seemed to speak to her, to beckon her, promising to reveal the answers if she only took another step. The figure paused, its head turning slowly, locking eyes with Emily. She could hear the voice more clearly now. It was deep and old, ancient even, as if the world itself was speaking to her. It's too late for you, Emily. You should have listened. Her heart hammered in her chest as the figure inched closer. Behind her, the door to the cabin creaked open. She could hear footsteps. Her parents, suddenly aware of something wrong, had stepped outside as well. Emily! James! Come back! Her mother screamed, but it was too late. The whispers began to escalate, becoming a deafening cacophony of screams and wails that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emily's vision began to blur, the world around her dissolving into a whirlwind of shadows and darkness. She stumbled backward, her legs giving way beneath her. A cold hand, icy to the touch, gripped her wrist. You should have stayed inside. But now, you're ours. In an instant, the snow around them seemed to absorb her, the ground turning to a thick black mass that swallowed her feet, pulling her deeper. Mom! Dad! James cried, trying to pull away from Emily's grip, but it was too late. Emily was being dragged into the snow, her body sinking deeper into the abyss. Just as her parents reached them, the figure lunged forward, and in one final chilling motion, Emily vanished into the snow with a scream that echoed through the freezing night air. Her mother's scream joined hers, but no one could hear it. The forest was silent once more, the whispers gone, as if the night had swallowed everything. Hours later, the storm had passed. The family searched frantically for Emily, calling her name through the white expanse, but no trace of her could be found. The cabin was empty, silent, except for the wind, until one final whisper echoed through the cabin's walls. The snow. Claims. All. The lost ones. And though Emily's family never saw her again, from that day forward, the voices continued to haunt the cabin in the snow. The whispers didn't just come from the wind, they came from beneath the snow, from something much darker, and anyone who ventured too close would hear those whispers, calling them toward their doom. The snow claimed them all, just as it had claimed Emily, and no one dared come close to the cabin again. The stranger at the door. It was a particularly brutal December evening in a sleepy rural town, where the first heavy snowfall of the season blanketed the world in a layer of white. the kind of snow that swept through the trees, turning every familiar thing outside into a ghostly blur, creating an oppressive silence. Inside the house, Emma and her younger brother Noah, two teenagers still awake long after dark, sat cozily on the couch. They'd been watching a movie, nestled under blankets to combat the unyielding cold, only the flickering light of the TV illuminating their faces. Their parents had left earlier in the evening to visit relatives, promising they'd be back soon after, but by now, the snowstorm outside had intensified, raging as if the sky itself was alive with fury. The wind howled against the windows with a deep, unnatural moan, and the storm had completely swallowed up their house in isolation. It was in this eerie silence that the knock came. At first, Emma had thought it was just the wind, some loose shutter slamming against the window frame or a tree branch hitting the glass. The whole house creaked from the pressure of the wind, so it was easy to dismiss. But then, a second knock came. Harder, sharper. 3 knocks in rapid succession, loud enough that it didn't sound like the wind anymore, but rather something intentional, something determined. Emma and Noah both froze. Noah's eyes darted toward the door, his body tense and alert, a slow shiver crawling up his spine. "You expecting someone?" Emma asked, trying to hide the sudden unease bubbling up in her chest. Noah, normally the bold one of the two, shook his head. No one would come out here in this storm. The knock came again. It wasn't the kind of knock someone would make unless they knew exactly where they were and precisely what they were doing. Emma instinctively walked toward the door, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "Noah, I don't like this," Emma whispered, her voice betraying the fear that she could no longer hide. Noah shook his head, but followed behind her, his eyes wide with a mixture of concern and confusion. Neither of them had any clue who would come knocking, but neither of them felt safe now. Still, they'd always been taught to be polite, to help those in need, especially around the holidays. Emma hesitated, then slowly opened the door a crack, just enough to see who was outside. The instant she laid eyes on him, something deep within her gut recoiled. The man at the door was standing almost perfectly still, not moving even as the wind howled and blasted snowflakes in every direction. He was tall, too tall, and the dim light outside didn't do much to reveal his features. His coat was thick, nearly swallowing his form in a blanket of black fabric, and he wore a heavy hood that obscured his face, leaving only his eyes visible, 2 dark, glowing orbs in the dim light. His skin was pale, so pale it looked almost sickly, the pale glow of his face contrasting against the deep, stormy background behind him. But his eyes, they were the most unsettling feature. They were impossibly bright, neon, almost unnaturally luminous, casting a cold, ghostly glow. And in those eyes, Emma saw something. A darkness. A void that sent a shiver down her spine. She looked away quickly, her breath coming shallow. She tried to force the uneasiness to the back of her mind. "Can I help you?" Emma asked in a voice that came out far weaker than she intended. The man's lips moved slowly as he spoke. His voice came out strained and thin, as though it wasn't truly his to own. "Please. I'm lost. I've been stuck out here for hours. My car slid off the road in the snowstorm. I've been walking, trying to find shelter. Anywhere. I didn't expect anyone to be out here, but I'm begging you, can I come in?" Emma felt a pang of hesitation, every part of her body screaming to shut the door, to refuse him and run to find her phone. But something about the desperation in his voice paralyzed her. She didn't want to seem heartless, especially on a night like this. Before she could respond, the man's shoulders drooped. A subtle thing, almost as though he sensed her hesitation and was trying to coax her further. "I can't stay out here much longer. The storm, it's getting worse. I'll be gone as soon as I warm up. Just for a minute." His gaze locked onto hers, and her pulse quickened as she realized his eyes never blinked. He didn't blink even once during this entire exchange. Her stomach churned. Her head swam with the thoughts of 1,000 safety rules she'd been told as a child. Her body wanted to bolt, but she didn't. She just stood there, frozen. Noah spoke up finally, breaking the trance that had formed between Emma and the man. "We should call the police, or at least Dad," he muttered, glancing nervously over at Emma. The stranger's smile faltered for a brief second, before returning, larger and more unsettling. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice deepening, a slight rasp in it, as if something inside him was threatening to break through. "Noah, maybe he's telling the truth." Emma's voice was thin, shaky. She was still not entirely sure, but something in her compelled her to believe him. The man slowly moved forward as Emma tried to pull the door shut, but before she knew it, the door was wrenched wide open by the stranger, who was already in the house before she could object. She stumbled backward in shock. The man stepped into the hallway, his feet sinking silently into the floorboards, as if the house itself was accommodating his presence, swallowing him up whole. His eyes did not leave Emma's, glowing faintly as he moved past her, filling the space around him with a palpable heaviness. Everything seemed colder all of a sudden, colder than the winter storm outside. "Please," the man repeated, his voice suddenly calm and deeply menacing. "I don't want to stay long. You won't regret it." A cold wind rushed in through the door, and Emma's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. The faint, gentle sounds of their house, flickering lights, the hum of a distant appliance, grew muffled and distant, as if they were shrinking away from the man's presence. Noah backed up slowly, too scared to say anything. Suddenly, the stranger took a step forward, closer to Emma. The temperature in the house had dropped to the point where her breath was now visible in the air. Her heart was pounding. "Why don't you just call them?" The stranger's voice suddenly became like velvet in the darkness, low and comforting. "But it's too late. They won't get here in time. None of you will ever leave once the storm settles." Emma's knees buckled. The sensation of something cold, dark, ancient began crawling up her spine, like shadows reaching into the depths of her very soul. Before Emma could scream, a guttural laugh escaped the stranger's lips, deep and unsettling. It echoed, growing louder until it drowned out all other noise. The air grew dense. The house groaned as though it were alive, pressing in on them, pushing them closer and closer together until there was nowhere to move. The stranger raised a hand, gesturing like a conductor orchestrating some dark symphony. As his fingers curled, Emma felt a strange tug, like something was pulling at her from the very walls themselves. The storm raged louder outside now, thrashing violently against the house as Emma and Noah backed away, panic gripping them. She felt the presence of the stranger behind her, felt him creeping closer, until the fear paralyzed her and she couldn't move. Her world closed in, twisted by dark, muffled whispers, until her senses overloaded with the shriek of her own heartbeat. And then, all of the lights went out. The door slammed behind them, sealing them inside the house with the stranger, whose glowing eyes seemed to pierce through the dark. But it wasn't just the storm anymore. It was him. Outside, the house stood eerily silent. Snow continued to fall, but no tracks led to or away from the front door. The storm raged on, without mercy. And in the corner of the house, in the dim glow from the window, a shadow lingered, waiting. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for more, and remember, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop exploring the unknown.